What if you woke up tomorrow in ancient Egypt? No warning, no preparation, just the blinding sun over the Nile, the sound of distant chants, and the looming shadows of pyramids on the horizon. At first, it might feel like a dream come true. The land of pharaohs, gods, and eternal monuments. But within minutes, that dream would twist into a nightmare. Because ancient Egypt wasn't built for you. Its beauty concealed danger at every corner, ruthless disease, unforgiving labor, and customs so alien they could get you killed for a simple mistake. You wouldn't just be a visitor in this world, you'd be a fragile outsider, clinging to survival in a place where even the locals barely made it past their youth. And the real question isn't if you'd survive in ancient Egypt. It's how long you'd last before becoming just another forgotten chapter in history. Born into danger. From the very moment of birth, life in ancient Egypt was a gamble. For every child born along the Nile, there was a terrifying chance, sometimes as high as half, that they wouldn't survive their first few days. Complications during pregnancy, infections, and disease often decided the fate of a newborn before they ever opened their eyes. And for the children who did survive, the struggle was only beginning. Malnutrition haunted their early years. Food was scarce, illnesses spread quickly, and medicine was little more than prayers and rituals. Even something as simple as a fever could spiral into tragedy. Forget the idea of childhood as we know it today. Egyptian children weren't shielded from work or hardship. From the moment they could walk, they were expected to help, whether it was tending animals, hauling water, or caring for younger siblings. Childhood wasn't playtime, it was survival training. So, if you somehow landed in ancient Egypt as a child, your odds of making it even to your teenage years were razor thin. And even as an adult, you'd still face a grim reality, because the next challenge was what kept every Egyptian alive and starving at the same time. A harsh diet. In ancient Egypt, food wasn't pleasure, it was survival. And survival came in the form of bread. Not the fluffy, warm loaves we know today, but dense, gritty slabs ground from emmer wheat. The grinding stones left tiny fragments of sand and rock in the dough, which meant every bite slowly wore down your teeth. By adulthood, many Egyptians had mouths filled with pain, cracked enamel, and rotting gums. Alongside the bread came onions, lentils, and whatever vegetables could be grown or bartered. If your family lived by the river, perhaps a fish would make it to the table, smoked, dried, or salted to last just a little longer. Fruits like figs and dates were treasures, rare luxuries that most peasants only tasted on special occasions. And meat? Forget it. Cattle and goats were far too valuable alive, providing milk and labor. Only the wealthy or the priests saw regular meat on their plates. For everyone else, malnutrition was normal. Children grew small and frail, adults carried the scars of hunger in their bones, and every meal was less about satisfaction and more about keeping enough strength to work one more day. But food wasn't the only alien struggle you'd face. Even if you managed to quiet your hunger, you'd be a stranger in a world where words and gestures could cost you your life. An alien world of language and customs. Imagine stepping into a crowded Egyptian marketplace. Merchants shout, children run between stalls, and scribes scratch symbols into papyrus. You open your mouth to ask for water, but nothing comes out that anyone would understand. Even if you spoke modern Egyptian Arabic, it wouldn't help you here. Ancient Egyptian was a completely different language, written in hieroglyphs and spoken in sounds long forgotten. To the people around you, your words would be meaningless noise. And worse, your silence or confused stares would make you stand out immediately. But language was only the beginning. Social rules in ancient Egypt were as rigid as stone. A wrong gesture, an insult you didn't even know you gave, could mark you as an enemy or a fool. A simple handshake, for example, might not even exist in the way you imagine. Religious rituals, greetings, and offerings followed traditions carved deep into their culture. To break them wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. You wouldn't just look foreign. You'd act foreign, every movement betraying that you didn't belong. And in a society built on strict order, sticking out was the fastest way to find yourself at the very bottom of their social pyramid. And at the bottom, life didn't just get hard, it became brutal. At the bottom of society. In ancient Egypt, Society was carved like a pyramid, and you would not be anywhere near the top. At the summit stood the pharaoh, a living god, surrounded by priests, nobles, and scribes. These were the educated elite, the people whose names filled scrolls and whose tombs lined the desert. You, on the other hand, would be dropped straight into the dust at the bottom. To the Egyptians, you wouldn't be a mysterious traveler from the future. You'd be mistaken for a nobody, a wandering laborer, or worse, a slave. Slaves in Egypt, called hem, were treated as property. They had no voice, no protections, and their survival depended entirely on the mercy of their masters. Most lived harsh, punishing lives, subjected to endless labor under a burning sun. Abuse was common, and rights were non-existent. And remember, you can't speak the language, you don't know the customs, and you have no useful skills for this ancient world. To them, you'd be nothing but a body to put to work. And work, in ancient Egypt, was relentless. Backbreaking labor. The Egyptians didn't have machines, ox-drawn plows, or iron tools to ease the burden of work. Labor was muscle, sweat, and endurance, and if you were at the bottom, it meant yours. Most peasants were farmers, bound to the rhythm of the Nile. Every year, the great river flooded its banks, spreading fertile soil across the plains. That soil gave life to Egypt's crops, but it came at a terrible cost. To farm the land, you'd have to wade barefoot into the river, carrying buckets of water, pulling reeds, or planting seeds. And in those waters lurked an unseen terror, parasitic worms. These blood flukes slipped through skin and settled deep inside the body, leaving their victims feverish, exhausted, and bleeding from within. Ancient texts even describe men who menstruated, a haunting sign of infection spreading through the population. With no cure, the disease became a lifelong sentence of pain and weakness. And farming wasn't your only possible fate. You could just as easily be thrown into construction gangs, dragging limestone blocks under the desert sun to build monuments that would outlast your own short life. The work was brutal, the hours endless, and food scarce. Even the strongest men broke under its weight. But illness and hunger weren't the only threats. In Egypt, sickness spread as easily as the sand in the wind, and for a foreigner like you, the next breath might already carry your end. The shadow of disease. Even if you survived the backbreaking labor, disease would stalk you at every step. Ancient Egypt was a land without antibiotics, vaccines, or modern medicine. A cough wasn't just a cough. It could be tuberculosis spreading through the workforce. A fever might not pass. It could be malaria taking hold after a single mosquito bite. Smallpox scarred the population, claiming lives in waves that no healer could prevent. For someone from the modern world, with no natural resistance to these ancient strains, infection would be almost guaranteed. Your immune system, trained against today's viruses, would be defenseless against diseases that once ravaged entire kingdoms. One wrong touch, one shared drink, one crowded day in a marketplace could spell the end. And even if by some miracle you avoided the sickness that swept through villages and work camps, your life could still take another dangerous turn. Because for many Egyptians, escaping farm work meant being handed a weapon and marching straight into battle. Drafted into war. If you weren't breaking your back in the fields or hauling stone, your fate might be even worse. You could be drafted into the pharaoh's army. To the rulers of Egypt, peasants were as valuable with a spear in hand as with a plow. But don't imagine disciplined ranks with polished armor. As a foot soldier, you'd be given the bare minimum: a wooden spear, a rough shield, maybe a strip of leather for protection if you were lucky. Then you'd be marched onto battlefields where chaos reigned. Arrows rained from the sky, chariots thundered past, and enemy blades cut through men like reeds in the wind. There was no training, no strategy you'd recognize, only a storm of noise and terror. And in that storm, hesitation was death. Most soldiers never returned home. They died nameless, their bodies left under the desert sun or swallowed by the Nile's waters. And even if, against all odds, you survived the battlefield, your troubles wouldn't be over. Because sometimes, rising higher in society brought not safety, but a far darker fate. Even service to the pharaoh was deadly. Let's say fortune favored you. You escaped disease, survived labor, and somehow caught the attention of someone powerful. Perhaps you became a servant in the pharaoh's household. Compared to life in the fields, it might feel like a miracle: shelter, food, and protection within the palace walls. But in ancient Egypt, even privilege could turn into a death sentence. Because when a pharaoh died, their closest servants often followed them, literally. Archaeologists have found evidence of retainer sacrifices, servants buried alongside their ruler to continue serving in the afterlife. To the Egyptians, this was considered an honor, a sacred duty. To you, it would be unthinkable. Your loyalty wasn't rewarded with freedom, but with ritual death. And while some scholars argue that these sacrifices faded in later dynasties, the shadow of the practice never disappeared. Serving the most powerful person in Egypt meant tying your fate to theirs, and when they passed on, you might too. So whether you were a farmer, a soldier, or even a servant of the divine king, every path carried danger. In Egypt, survival wasn't a right, it was a fleeting stroke of luck. The final gamble. The pyramids, the temples, the golden tombs. We look at ancient Egypt today with awe. But beneath its glory was a brutal truth: survival was never guaranteed. As a newborn, your life hung on chance. As a peasant, hunger and disease were constant companions. As a laborer, your body broke under endless toil. As a soldier, you marched toward certain death. And even in the shadow of the pharaoh's palace, privilege could end with a ritual grave. For the people of Egypt, this was simply life. For you, dropped suddenly into their world, it would be a swift and merciless countdown. You wouldn't just struggle, you wouldn't last. And that's the hidden chapter of ancient Egypt. Behind the monuments that defy time, most lives were short, fragile, and forgotten. The question isn't would you survive, but how long until history swallowed you whole.